let's get everyone seated, please, for the last panel. I'm going to ask my colleague to help me invite the people to get into the room. Welcome back. I'm very much pleased to introduce the last panel, addressing one of the key pain points in this region, that of contracting and risk management. Managing all sorts of risk has been key for every project leader, for every transformational leader, and turning every risk into opportunities. That's going to be the focus of this final panel, which is going to discuss all of the challenges around the contracting, and we know the challenges are many around that, and what are the best practices. We're going to hear from the key players in the industry. What are the best processes that need to put in place in order to manage and mitigate all of the risk, and what are some of the creative, disruptive, or dispute resolution or claim management that can exist and can be of practice. So how are we evolving to optimize the life cycle and bring in more efficiency? I'm very much pleased to introduce one of the well-renowned expert in the domain. He's a global person, and he is the CEO for the CAT Group, Dr. Joseph Jibara. Dr. Joe, he's serving as the CEO since November 2019. The CAT Group is the world leader in the contracting industry, serving a wide spectrum of sectors such as the oil and gas, energy, utilities, civil infrastructure, and buildings, and has many branches in the Gulf as well as in Nigeria. So welcome, Dr. Joe. Looking forward to your insights. Allow me to introduce Dr. Sabih Kisaf, who is the Vice President of ICE and Infrastructure Lead of MENA region, in addition to being one of the lead for the Hyperloop, one of the super mega project in transportation. Welcome, Dr. Sabih, to the panel. He has extensive experience in the design, construction of civil and heavy civil infrastructure projects, such as the Heathrow Terminal 5 in London, Khalifa Port and Khalifa Industrial Zone in Abu Dhabi, and many other projects in London, the metro operation and London Underground, and so. So welcome, Doctor, to our session. And I'd like to invite Dr. Ahmed Saleh, the Senior Director of Strategy, Projects, Knowledge Management, and Operation Excellence. How are you doing? How are you doing with leadership award? So Dr. Ahmed, obviously, he's a well-experienced project manager and organization entrepreneurship expert. Dr. Saleh established and led the project management unit within K&A. So in 2006, and we hear more from you and understand all of this smartness. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Welcome. Jeff Savager, am I introducing it well? So you are a partner of Vincent Masons. Is it correct? So welcome to the panel, and thank you for being here. Jeff advises both owners, contractor in relations to major energy and infrastructure projects, both in the Middle East and widely, and he has been in the region for nearly 15 years. He's specialized in dispute resolution. You are the person we need in this room, and has substantial experience of acting as a project counsel during the course of the project life cycle, as well as representing client in arbitration, tough role, proceeding, and so on. And finally, our lovely Vice President of Product at PMI, Sierra, is the moderator of this panel. Sierra, the floor is yours. Thank you. Looking forward.
Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. We're last but not least talking about the thing that keeps all of us up at night: contracting, risk management, and new opportunities in the built environment space for mega projects. So we're going to start our conversation talking about, as I would say in my culture, the big elephant in the room. In the last couple of years, we've been fraught with world events like the coronavirus pandemic, now the Ukrainian crisis, climate change, flooding, and things of that nature. So with all of these world events, what best practices and processes help in managing and mitigating risk in that kind of a context? Let's start with Joe.
I think to start with, you covered well that we had the COVID pandemic, what we need to always recognize is that we all started the COVID pandemic not knowing what's going to happen. At the beginning, people thought it was a V-shaped economic slowdown. Then we said, no, it's a U-shape. Then it maybe became a W. So the reality is we were going into a new unknown. And one thing that as that developed, the post-COVID environment was also as important for us to understand so that we can figure out how to react. What we've seen is a lot of restrictions, travel from being able to bring labor into the countries. From us as leaders to be able to visit construction sites, to be able to visit areas of operation. So when we look at the global impact, we then realize that a lot of factories shut down, a lot of manufacturing facilities were shut down or stopped producing or did not have raw materials. So the risks ended up compounding and creating an effect that the post-COVID pandemic impact was more significant to a lot of our industries, as we know. One of the most surprising for us all, I think, was the computer chips for cars and vehicles. We all depend on buses, transport. This thing is pushing on me. So large equipment vehicles, etc., to be able to do our work. So all of that has driven us. Plus, during that period of time, we all realized that there was a significant oil price collapse. It was the first time in the history. I've been in the oil and gas industry since 1994. It was the first time since that I'm aware of that the price of oil went to negative. So it's a significant element. So when we talk about processes, I want to maybe be a bit radical in my response. And I want to say it's working together. Because at the end of the day, clients, contractors, subcontractors, all of us, if we put our hand together in these challenges, because these challenges are not impacting one of us, they're impacting all of us. And we all have the different abilities and are best suited to address part of that risk. None of us is able to address the full risk. So one of the things that we need to make sure that we always look at and learn how to do better, us and everybody around us, is to how do we sit down together at the same table and agree on how to address some of these challenges together. As somebody was saying over lunch, the World Health Organization just announced recently that the next pandemic is going to be more difficult than this pandemic. So I invite everybody to consider how do we do this by working together. So over the period that we've faced, and following that, when we get to the part where we started to seeing the commodity pricing coming up due to the post-COVID pandemic and and due to the Ukraine war, what we've noticed is that the measures that we had to get to is being able to sit with some of the clients and looking at how do we best manage the risk, commodity risk, pricing risk. And some of the clients were very cognitive about it and were willing to sit down and talk through who best is to manage and take the commodity risk, while others were were more interested in always having a lump sum price and a turnkey lump sum price. So these are where managing those practices is important. From the other perspective, I want to touch on all of us as leaders. We are responsible for the morale. We're responsible for helping our teams being able to work on the ground in difficult conditions. So traveling to site is important, and by creating this environment where we're able to visit site, which was restricted, and finding ways through communication, through other means of motivation and ensuring all of this is definitely necessary. So I think I will leave it there instead of taking more time.
Okay, thank you. Jed, what's your opinion here? What best practices would you note to be helpful in this post-pandemic or during the pandemic, wherever we are in the cycle here? What would you note?
I think it's good to look back at what's happened and how the industry's responded to the pandemic. And I think, you know, certainly from my perspective, what we saw a lot of were agreements being reached. Coming back to Joseph's point of view, the industry coming together. What we saw around COVID was far more of time being granted, not so much money. So, you know, contracts were responding to the pandemic, and I think, you know, stakeholders were accepting that a hardline approach wasn't going to be best for project. I think what we've got to do going forwards is then look at the consequences of the pandemic, and that's what we're seeing now with material escalation, obviously with the container shortage globally, which has really affected delivery times, but in an indirect way. And so when the contracting or the supply chain is looking to their contract in terms of, well, how do I manage that? The force majeure clause perhaps isn't responding in the way it should do. And one of the reasons for that is a lot of the time, force majeure clause, change in law clause, the sort of clauses people have been looking at over the last couple of years in terms of trying to regulate their entitlement, they're very much focused on the place of the project. And so what we've seen, obviously we're in a global supply chain, and what we're seeing is the indirect effects of material shortages, raw material supplies. For example, recently in China with the shutdowns, etc., that was affecting China and the suppliers, but their suppliers in the supply chain. So the main contractor wasn't able to trigger, or aren't able to trigger, the force majeure clause. It's not affecting performance in the country, it's affecting their supply chain, which is global. And I think going forwards, thinking about that collectively in terms of how that's going to be regulated is going to be really important. As Joseph said, the next pandemic is going to be far worse than this pandemic. So how do we approach this in a collaborative way to make sure that the risk is allocated fairly? Obviously, the nth degree, of course, is that if the contractor isn't able to be compensated, it gets to a point where the job fails, the contract has to be terminated, and one's back to square one. Now, on one view, it might be said that the owner can recoup that for a claim for termination costs from that contractor. But that's no good, for example, if that contractor has gone insolvent or is unable to continue trading. And so I think there has to be that sort of reality check around what's best for project. It's not necessarily going to be the cheapest solution to adopt a hardline approach in relation to all of the risk being transferred to the supply chain with the pandemic. So I think it's thinking about how those things work, thinking about the global nature of construction and how our contracts respond to that complex interaction.
You know, that's a really good segue to our next question, which first I'll pose to Ahmad, Dr. Ahmad. What commercial solutions and agreements are possible to share that risk amongst the stakeholders, both here in the Middle East, for example, PPPs and risk sharing and that kind of thing? What types of commercial solutions and agreements would you recommend?
Well, if we take a snapshot of 10 or 15 years ago, the normal or the common way of doing projects, the procurement model I'm talking here, is design, bid, build. So usually projects are developed by clients, and clients will bid, and then contractor will come on board and deliver the project. Since 5 years, the region started to see some changes where design build came into the picture, and then we started seeing a lot of design and build. However, also, the region is going into more of privatization. So the biggest change is happening, for example, in KSA, where privatization body, as a government body, has been established to start working with healthcare, education, and other entities to produce PPP projects. We, as a company, we delivered one big project for for education. We worked as part of the SPV the consortium to deliver 60 projects in the kingdom, and this is only a startup, and I think more privatization is coming and more PPPs we will see in the future in the region. Dubai, for example, they have already established a law for PPPs. Oman is the same thing. Kuwait, I think, also the same. UAE and KSA are on the way. But I mean, we'll see some mega projects going into this, not only small projects.
Thank you. Dr. Sabih, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in any infrastructure project, the biggest challenge, it's you as a contractor or a client, you have to identify your risk. And if you have good people who can identify the risk, they'll be able to mitigate these risks. But in ideal world, you have to share the risk. Who is the best with taking this risk? At the end of the day, whichever is going to take the risk, is the client going to pay for it? And if you as a client, if you're passing the risk, you're paying more for it. And I can give an example of where basically the client took all the risk and the project was delivered on cost, on time, and I think is one of the few projects in the UK. The project we mentioned at the beginning, Heathrow Terminal 5. And the reason for that, the project was delivered on time and to cost, because the client said, we're taking all the risk. You designer, you planner, you contractor, go and do it. And this shows collaboration as well between all stakeholders. Basically, we're designing and we're detailing the reinforcement at the preliminary design. The contractor know how this reinforcement is going to be implemented. And also, it's make it easier for the client to maintain the project because he got what he need and the good value to lower the cost of the maintenance for the future. And the other example of good way of implementing projects, we have early contractor involvement. This help a lot for the client, for the contractor, and for the designer. It's, you know what you're going to get as a contractor, and we designers, we know how we design, but sometimes not all designers expect how it's going to be implemented. And it's very difficult to put yourself as a designer in shoes of the contractor, from the health and safety point of view, from aborted work, and so on. And therefore, early contractor involvement help the three parties, the designer, the contractor, and the client.
Thank you. So let's shift a little bit to talk more specifically about contractors, all right? How can owners and contractors limit their exposure to possible disputes for material price increase, which we talked about earlier, and delays? I'd like to start this off with Jed.
Well, it comes back to allocation of risk, ultimately. There's been a lot of talk over the last 6-12 months back around material price escalation clauses, the likes of FIDIC, etc. Can we move back to regulating this contractually? Whilst we're seeing a little bit of that come back into the market, I think we're a long way off that becoming a norm in terms of dealing with the current situation. But it's really a balance of risk issue. At the end of the day, we come back to that issue. If a project's going to fail, wouldn't we be better off engaging around a proper allocation of risk on price escalation, making sure that the contractor is not benefiting, for example, from delaying the project and taking advantage of its own tendering mistakes, but making sure that making sure there's a right balance in terms of delivering the project. And we come back to that best for project mentality. So I think there is a mechanism there. You know, price escalation clauses are pretty common. It really requires the stakeholders in the project to want to share that risk. Until we get that shift in mentality, we're going to be in that difficult position where the contractor is saying, look, I'm finding it really tough to perform. And when we talk about mega or giga projects, the sums involved are just so huge that it doesn't take a lot for that to really drag a contractor or a consortium into difficulty. And then you're looking at project failure and what can the owner, developer do to sort of mitigate its risk. And ultimately, all you've got in that situation, you've got the bond, you've got securities, etc. But ultimately, that won't be enough. If you want to deliver the project on time, etc., you're going to pay that premium if you get a replacement contractor on board. So aren't we better off by having mechanisms in the contract that allow people to fairly regulate that risk? And I think that's where I think we need to focus at the moment.
Does anyone have any additional recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, we know in big projects, if you have, knowledgeable client and good designers, you, at the beginning of the design, you identify the long lead items. And if you agree with the potential contractor from the beginning and you pay the contractor to purchase, all the required items in time, definitely if it's going to be needed in 6 months, 8 months, or a year, you have your equipment secured. Even if the prices will go up, you paid the right price for your items.
But, going back to what both Sabih and Jed said, I think doing what's best for project always comes back to focus us all. So one thing that we all know is we can use indexing mechanisms in the contract, or we can use, and when we do that, one of the parties will take the quantity risk, the other party takes the pricing risk. So there are models where we can share the risk for the best of project. To try and put all of it in one side or the other side is always not the best solution. So fairness in the models that we put together and using them is one of the essential elements of how we can manage it. So I think for that one, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I think Joe, you mentioned a very, very good aspect of fairness in the risk sharing. If you look at the best models in the world that consider risk sharing and fairness, which is the Canadian model of sharing risk using the PPPs, and then the Australian model after that. So this is now being looked at by the whole world to follow, to be honest, and the region here are making a lot of use of and benefit of those models to try to be as fair as possible, because the contractor is not the bad, should not be the bad player in the game, but the contractor should not also bear all the risks. And the risk will be divided in a fair way where everybody will have a win-win situation where all can collaborate because they co-create this SPV together.
Okay. Let's shift a bit. So when things go really bad, beyond arbitration and litigation, what are some creative dispute resolution clauses that meet the project needs in terms of timeliness, flexibility, and finality? How do you see this evolving in the future, where potentially, as you guys have all mentioned, the projects will be co-created by the clients and the owners in a network platform? Let's start with you, Dr. Ahmad.
So I think the construction industry is lacking behind in terms of advancement with technology. We always talk about technology, and we saw in the previous also sessions and yesterday we were talking about using technology within construction. And when we talk about this, the ultimate thinking of that is going into using BIM as a tool. But if we look at also at BIM, we see BIM is not a new thing. It's been there for the past 20 years maybe. And still the ecosystem within the construction industry is not totally aligned to use BIM, as we will go on the discussion later today. But what we think, and it should happen in the future, maybe in the next 10 years, let's look at other industries, how things are working and how money is generated from that. Take Uber, for example, take Airbnb, others, where people usually to compete with each other, they have been transformed into collaborate with each other. So if the construction industry in the future will be, all the stakeholders will work within a platform that make everyone collaborate instead of compete, I think that will make a real transformation in the construction industry. Personally, as a company, we were discussing such approaches with one of big clients in KSA, but we discovered that, okay, the concept is nice, but the understanding is not there. So if I borrow a notion from, and a concept from Gartner's, and also it's there in the literature, there was something they call it digital dexterity. The digital dexterity is about if you have an ambition toward digitalization and if you have the capability. Most of the time, we as companies, we have the ambition toward digitalization, but we don't have fully the capability. So that's where, if we have partial capability, we go to optimizing some of the processes. So for example, we automate delivery of projects. But if we go into totally a digital transformation, that's where we need to set up the right backbone, platforms, everything. The ecosystem should work as a whole to create such an opportunity. But I think this is needed in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any other additional thoughts about other ways to settle these things outside of arbitration and litigation?
I mean, I just picked up the word collaboration, and I think, you know, that's certainly looking a long way into the future. And obviously, being a disputes lawyer, there is the cynic in me about, well, then how do we manage those interfaces? So there'll always be a need to resolve conflict, but collaboration has got to be the way to shortcutting where we are currently, where we're in sort of lengthy, you know, time-consuming arbitration litigation, which ruins relationships. It's not best for project. So how do we get back from that? And so what are we seeing now that can be used going forwards or harnessed far better? Certainly things like dispute adjudication boards. When I came to the region in 2009, I think I've come across one at that point in time. Now, across both Saudi, UAE, and some of the other Gulf jurisdictions, they are being used. I think really for those sorts of things to be successful on the mega projects, because obviously it's a cost to having these dispute boards in place. But if the project warrants it, where they really earn their value, is to have these people there at the beginning of a project, i.e. effectively as the policeman over the parties, right? Because you've got someone that's reading that correspondence that's truly independent of the two parties. Both parties appoint that board. They're happy with those individuals, and that's one of the great strengths about that process. But they're there acting as the policeman over both parties' conduct. Everyone knows that if a dispute does get referred to that board, they're watching how this thing evolves. And what came out of the 2017 FIDIC contracts was a bit more of a nuanced approach, where what was being proposed was actually the board should be proactive. So let's not wait for the parties to get into dispute. Let's earn our money and be watching the project evolve. And if we see a dispute coming up or evolving, then can we step in? Can we offer a view or suggest to the parties, look, we think we can see where this is going. Maybe we could help and give a non-binding view on the particular issue, which will help you both commercially come together to work it out. Now, that, to me, is true collaboration. It's using a third party to sort of help that through. And I was really interested to hear that, Dr. Tully, we're involved in London Underground, and so you may be aware of a pilot that was run on the expansion of the London Underground, which was in conjunction with the RICS. It was called CAP, Conflict Avoidance Panel. Yeah. And the Conflict Avoidance Panel was kind of appointed at the beginning, a vast number of individuals, a pool, if you like, that could be called upon to resolve disputes as they arose. What's really interesting around the timescales in that, you were looking at 21 days from referral to a non-binding view, because 21 days is far too short for something binding to be given. But that's, you know, that really helped on that particular project unlock entrenched disputes. And when you look at projects, that's the real threat. You know, when the money's big enough, you just won't get there. So, you know, from my point of view, those sorts of mechanisms, if we learn to harness those a bit more and really use them, and that requires all stakeholders to want that culturally. But yeah.
So Joe, it looks like you have something.
Yeah,
you'd like to add.
I agree with Jed on I like the approach, but I want to say that maybe we're missing one thing that's important, which is, I think, front-end loading the relationship and sitting up front when we sign the contract and sitting down together as client contractor and making sure we have alignment on what is it that we're embarking to do, and aligning on how we're going to manage the project. What does the change procedures that we're going to use to agree on the projects, how we're going to make decisions on the projects. If we take the collaborative approach at the beginning, the first few weeks, and make sure we align those, a lot of the elements that you're referring to, then we won't need. And from my perspective, this is what I like to push more forward with, is let's take the time to, on mega projects especially, to go front and load that relationship and alignment on how we want to execute, what is the project execution plan, what are the elements of how we're going to do stakeholder management, all of those up front, agree on change management, agree on what is the response time for clients on requests, so that we don't get to that point. So from my perspective, one of the essential elements of resolution of these issues is not to get into them, which we always need to make sure we try first.
Okay. I like that proactivity and that approach. It's a good segue yet again into another topic. We've had a lot of discussion over the last couple of days about technology and how it can impact it. Thinking about technology, how might we use technology proactively to minimize and/or eliminate risk from the start of construction projects? Dr. Sabi, can you start us?
Yeah, I mean, we know I'm the generation of printing hundreds and hundreds of drawings, having two sets, one at the consultant, one the site, and now everything you have this, and you don't need anything. That's clearly, I'm the sliding ruler instead of the calculator, and therefore technology improves so much, and there are areas where technology can help, and I call this is the 5 C's. The first C is collaboration, and I'm not going to expand too much on the collaboration. Everyone said collaboration, and the collaboration, not client-contractor, but client-designer, client-contractor, and so on, and stakeholders. And therefore, normally, good collaboration, it's a successful project. Also, communication, and we have a say in the construction industry in the UK. Don't ask me to explain it, but we call it the mushroom management. I think you don't need to do the mushroom management. You have to communicate, you have to keep your team, your client, your stakeholders always on, they know all the changes. And the other one is the change management. There is a big problem with the change management. Again, going back to my experience when the MEP designer want to drill a hole in the ceiling, and he basically drilled it on the other side. The structural engineer didn't know anything about it, and when it's on site, it's exactly the other way around. And I worked on a project. Basically, we have two designers working the mega project, infrastructure project, and when they design their utilities, they are half a meter difference. And therefore, you have to deal with the change management. You have to communicate the changes, and you have to know who should know about all these changes. And I think it's been talked about competency. And it's mentioned about someone mending the air conditioning, but he doesn't know what he's doing 400 degrees outside 400. And therefore, you need competence engineers who can do the job. You can have a lot of engineers, but competent engineers, not everywhere. And therefore, I'm representing the ICE, and what we do, we basically qualify people to be competent. When you have competent people, you have qualified people on site, you know you are in safe hands. They will be able to deal with any changes on site. And the last one is basically you have to compliance. What means compliance? You have to build what the client asks you to build. No, this is the way I built it. No, we know how you do it. You've done it in different project. Now we have a different project, we have different client. I'm the client, I'm asking you to do it. And I think in the rail industry, we have good matrix, client requirement matrix, and you have, whenever you do your design, you have to tick this box. You've done, and you tick the box that your design is compliance with the client requirement.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about project overruns. Dr. Ahmad, how do you see technology helping us to minimize risk in that area?
Sure, and I would like also to dwell on what Dr. Sabih was saying about using technology to eliminate risk. And I'll give just a couple of examples of what we as a company did in many clients in UAE, KSA, and Oman, or in the region. Even we worked for a project in Canada in this regard. So we developed something we called Project Plus, and it's based on GIS. This, we provide the client with a command, with like a command center where the client comes every day in the morning. They come for 15 minutes, and they per few KPIs, what are the delays on time or ahead of time, and they look at these KPIs, and we put IP cameras on site, so the client doesn't need to sit with the contractor to see a project report, so they can see the project live every day, and they will understand in which region there is a delay, for example, because everything is posted into the system. So this kind of dynamic reporting to the client will eliminate the risk of getting notified later on where the issue has happened. So if there is something that can be anticipated as a risk, it can be anticipated right at the beginning. Plus, if we go a bit further, we're in the process of testing some technology that use AI during construction, and this technology is there in the market. Something like Autodesk Field, for example, is one of the software, or others, where the system will work and will understand and will calculate the behaviors of the projects. Then it will anticipate, predict risks that will happen based on the behavior of the project. And in this case, it will notify the project stakeholders of things that might happen in the future. So one of them is, for example, budget overrun. So if behavior of the project that was delays, then means that more man hours can be spent on the project, more manpower are required because maybe these tasks in the previous period we required more people to work on the task and so on. So it will notify that if the project will remain behaving the same, it means that there will be some delays and will be some overcost on the project. So these are a few examples that we have done them as a company, and in the process to do the other ones.
Okay. So for our final question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience to bring us questions. I would like all of you to answer this question briefly so we can save time for our esteemed guest here. How can we optimize the life cycle, the project life cycle, to bring more efficiency? Because that has been a theme here, the lack of efficiency in mega projects. How can we optimize that? And we'll just start with Joe and move our way down, please.
Optimizing life cycle is something that we all work on. And I think one of the things that a lot of things have been done in that domain. Some of them is doing design competitions at the beginning with the award, whoever gets it goes through the EPC. So feed competitions that lead into that. The optimization of the schedule by looking at agreements that are put in place to optimize based on technology that is being used. So client-contractor collaboration comes into how to select certain long lead items, some of the technology that's going to be used. Plus, one of the essential elements from my perspective is planning. The better you do the planning of a project, the better it is that you know that you're going to be able to deliver on time and effectively meet your targets. So I will leave it with that.
Yeah, I mean, when you say optimizing the life cycle, we think of from planning to decommissioning.
Yes.
And therefore, if you have, a knowledgeable client, He should be able, even at the beginning of the project, he will specify what are his requirements. And therefore, when the contractors come up with a solution which extend the life of the element, you should be rewarding the contractor because you're going to spend less money and less time in maintaining this asset. And the two things which come to my mind, I'm a bridge engineer, and the two elements which first deteriorate, first one is the expansion joint, and two is the bearing. And if the contractor with the knowledge and he will come up with a solution that extend the life cycle of bearing or expansion by 10 years, the contractor should be rewarded, not telling, no, this is included in your price. And therefore, it's collaboration and understanding between the client and the contractor.
Okay. Dr. Ahmad?
Again, I'll talk about the technology part. So, I'll provide two examples. One of them is looking from the same page. So if all project stakeholders are looking at the design from the BIM model that is developed by the consultant, moved to the contractor, and there are full digitization, as Dr. Sabih said. Now we have the iPad. If every engineer on site will look at the BIM model on his iPad and do all the comments and will send them back to the designer, then we will eliminate a lot of, let's say, discrepancies happening that we're looking at a design, but the consultant has a different version, and so on. So if we do this, and this is simple, this is something that can be done. Technology is there, and many people are using, but it's not like an integrated solution. So this is one example that can increase efficiency. The other one is using drones for site inspection instead of using site inspectors. So this will first save on labor, a lot of labor, and the other thing is will save on health and safety. So if we have incidents when people go into inspection into sites. So we have drones, and we can use these technologies to inspect and give us reports. This means that we will reduce time, increase accuracy because the amount of error will be minimal. And also, we will save on incidents. So this will increase efficiency in different dimensions.
Jed?
And I'll try and be quick, but I suppose coming at it from the contractual point of view, effective contract administration's got to be in there for efficiency in the project lifecycle. If we're looking at trying to get from beginning to end the delivered asset in the shortest time possible for the best price possible. Contract administration, by that I mean, both sides. One of the things over the last 14 years of being in region that, we really need to work on is that whole sort of how we deal with claims, how we deal with change, not that sort of both sides hunkering down into different positions. Because, for example, you haven't given notice within a 7-day time period, which, is pretty short. Being a bit more realistic about that, but also from the contractor side, actually don't put the contract in the top drawer and go about it as you have done for the last 30 years. It comes back to Joseph's point, it comes back to, Dr. Slee's point, which is, you've got to think proactively about how you're going to manage this project in the environment, in the now, and talk to the client about how that's going to work. And from the client's perspective, they've got to understand that they and their consultant have to play their part. If those things don't come together, you're just not going to drive those efficiencies in the project life cycle. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I'd like to open up for questions from the floor. I'll take the first one here from Ben.
Thank you. Very interesting conversations. One thing I wanted to raise was, as a former contractor, I saw a lot of issues where large-scale projects were being done prior to an operator being involved. So you're building it based on the early requirements. At Marina Bay Sands, we were halfway into building 2,700 hotel rooms, and then the operator turns up and says, "No, we've got to change everything." So I've seen that happening on many occasions. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, is there a good way to manage the risks involved? Because it seems to be pushed to the contractor to make those changes, do it quickly, and don't charge extra money, that sort of thing. So.
If I may start, because usually operators start with the consultant first before they go into the contractors. I've been in the same situation many times where we have, like in hotels or in hospitals. The best way is to engage the operator right at the concept design. Get the operator requirements right at the beginning, and then in this case, this is a proactive approach, of course, and this is the best way to do it. Sometimes it's difficult because if the client will not engage the operator right at the beginning, then we're obliged to do some changes. However, if the operator is not engaged, the design needs to be made as generic as possible with some core and shell, allowing for generic, let us say, generic operator requirements, and then do the changes as minimal as required when the operator comes on board.
Dr. Sabi, did you have something to add?
Yeah, again, digging from my experience, I work on a PMC project, mega project for transport plan for within a city, within a country. And as a responsible PMC, basically our team include from the planner to the operator. And therefore, in order to have good assets, you have to involve everyone. And the operator, I mean, we design in 2-3 years, we construct in 5 years, and we have assets 120 years. And you're ignoring the guy who is going to have it for 120 years. That's not right. And therefore, you have to involve the operator. And we've done it on London Underground. We've done the upgrade of the system, we've done the upgrade of the stations, and we always, when we have any design, has to go through the operation. They have to sign it off, because these are the guys going to take over and they're going to maintain it. And therefore, the operational must be included within the team.
It's an interesting perspective, because when I have to agree with the comments that have been said. Involving the operator first and from the beginning is important. But I want to give a different perspective. I spent a lot of my career in the offshore oil and gas industry. And in the offshore oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico, we had 4,000 platforms. And 4,000 platforms, at some point, each one of them were designed for the field that it was on. And after a while, we realized there's not too much difference between the fields, and we were moving them from one place to another, especially when the competition required us to lower the cost of getting the oil out. So sometimes over-specifying or putting in additional requirements because we're trying to do design that's fit for that purpose or fit for that, it can be over-specifying. So we need to be balanced. While I agree for a hotel or for a place where you're providing a certain luxury, you may need to have this, but for certain practical and in other industries, we have to be careful with over-designing.
I'd just add that I've had 2 arbitrations involving that exact issue, and not here in the UAE, but in the region. One, an airport project, another, it was oil and gas, and it was exactly that issue. The end user had not come along and seen certain aspects of how they wanted that facility to operate, and there were changes. The owner's response was, well, that's just design development contractor, the specs were loosely drafted, you take that risk. Of course, the contractor said, well, hold on a minute, that's a change to the requirements that I've interpreted them. So, I can only endorse what the panelists say, which is getting the end user involved as early as possible has to make sense. All I can say is there's a real risk it does go to arbitration if the money's big enough, as I've seen. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Hello. My name is Bakas. I'm a project director at Expo 2020, and it's been a pleasure listening to all of you. One of my question is, as a PMC, how do you see PMC being unbiased? While the PMC is being paid by the client, and at the same time, when general contractors are engaged, for example, ASGC or design supervision consultant like Khatib and Alimi, at the Expo we had them, they were paid by the client, by the Expo, right? How ASGC or any contractor for that matter would say no to them, because they will lose the contract. And how I, as Expo, would say no to the over-specification that might be there in Khatib al-Alami's design, when I don't know, because that's already outsourced, A. My second question is regarding involving collaboration and involving early parties. So when we are working with once-in-a-life projects, like you can always have a hotel or maybe a typical design building, like 100-story tower, like which is very common in Dubai. But when you are doing Expo 2020, when you're doing Expo 2030, how do you involve them so early, like 200 countries, how early? By the time we were there, sent by the Prime Minister's office, our Prime Minister was expecting that we knew everything, but we knew nothing until there, by the time we were there in 2020. Thirdly, the technology. Khatib al-Alami, sir, I would like to see this from you. The technology, you know, at the Expo we had Doom, where everyone was commenting everything, right? And that was too much to be done for the consultant, for the PMC, Jacobs and Mays, to get it through. By the time the comments used to come, the site was already having a crane stoppage for 3 days. How many comments and who would tailor it? It might be very easy to do all these iPad comments on a drawing that is having maybe 1 building, 2 villas, 3 villas. But how about a site that is like 4 hectares?
Let me answer the question of, is the PMC required? It depends on the client. The reason you have PMC because you don't have qualified, competent people within the client team to manage the project. And therefore, you need a PMC. Your PMC is going to be your eyes and ears to execute your project. And therefore, if a client has, qualified staff, there is no need for PMC. And the PMC, people think of the PMC as money spent by the client. I think the PMC is money saved for the client. And therefore, I think it's a big role, a PMC consultant, and on mega project and giga project, PMC play a big role in implementing what the client want.
Dr. Ahmad, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, the example you mentioned, Wakas, is we were doing a PMC work for the Expo 2020, and we've been also for 4 years now. We've been doing a PMC for the Minister of Finance for it's a big scale PMC. Let's say for the Minister of Finance, the KSA is almost like 300 to 400 billion Saudi riyals. So what we usually look at PMC, we look at a burden, as Dr. Sabih said, that the money the client will spend and just a waste of. But it can be turned into a real collaboration opportunity. If the PMC are working with the client hand in hand and working with other stakeholders hand in hand, and they use the technology to facilitate things, not to make obstacles, I think we can succeed, like the example that you mentioned in the Expo. But this is what is required, and this is hopefully that all PMC engagements can happen like this. I don't want to say that we're perfect. No, we have a lot of drawbacks here and there, but there is one focus that needs to be kept in mind when doing a PMC is what is the objective of the role, and what is the client objective that we want to attend to. So if we keep this in mind, I think we can achieve.
Ahmed, can I add a small thing?
Please.
What is the authority that's given to the PMC?
Ah.
Because if you're given the role but not given the authority, then we as contractors suffer from waiting on a decision. And that's what causes all of us not to have a good project. So that governance part is very important.
I would like to add a part on the technology, which is maybe not related to the question, but it's in general. There is a challenge on working with technology in the construction industry from the client side sometimes, from the contractor. But if I look now at KSA, look at Red Sea, for example, or NEOM, they imposing the use of BIM from all stakeholders. They don't accept any submission from a consultant or a client until it's in BIM. They also, Red Sea, require a consultant to be engaged, and there must be a BIM manager for each and every project. To be honest, I find it a very organized way. They're very advanced. They set the procedure. So it's very clear to any consultant, any client, or even they run it through their PMC. So this is where the new term of digital PMC came into the picture, or they call it digital leadership within PMC. And for me, it's been very effective from the client side.
Well, I want to thank all of you gentlemen for contributing today and sitting on the panel. This is the end of our session, but thank you all for your very thoughtful questions and for your time.